Now, O God, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. O God, you are our rock and our Redeemer, in whose name we pray. Amen. In the last many years, I've become profoundly moved by and increasingly acquainted with the writings of Meister Eckhart. His were writings that were mystical, a time when such writings were not always welcomed by the orthodoxy of the church. That might be why I like him so much. His are words that matter deeply. One such saying that you've heard me employ before is, "No one is forgotten. It is a lie, any talk of God that does not comfort you." Wow. Just imagine that. But for the purposes of our gathering this morning around this particular text, I think this quote of his seems especially appropriate. He said, "If the only prayer you say in life is thank you, that would suffice." If the only prayer you say in life is thank you, that would suffice. Thank you, gratitude, these are things that are ways of being, to be sure, but for most of us growing up, we have learned that it was the conditioned response as we were being taught manners by our parents, usually precipitated by the question, "What do you say?" in a moment when you're learning that to receive a thing that you maybe didn't expect, or when someone did a good turn toward you, you learn that the conditioned response is thank you. It's polite. Thank you is polite. By the way, and I've referenced this in previous sermons where I've talked around it, when someone says thank you, this is my preference, I'll just confess. When someone says thank you, what is the response in return? Not, no problem. I think that's a millennial thing, and maybe it's a sign of my age, but that drives me nuts. You're welcome is, for me, the conditioned response. Maybe that's how it is, you know. Well, back when I was young, we would just say, and that's now where I am. This story of all the things it is about one of gratitude. It's worth noting that in the Gospels, when the Gospel writer gives us a geographical location, we need to pay attention to that. And that's what happens in this very short reading. It's the region between Samaria and Galilee. There was no border wall. It was a region between two groups of people who didn't quite understand each other, even though there was common history, but there was the belief that the other was other. In that space between, all kinds of things happen in life. That space between who you were and who you are. That space between who you are and who you are becoming. It's that growing space where things aren't quite so black and white, quite so binary. It's that place where there's a fluidity. Trust me, grace lives in the fluidity. I have come to believe that grace really has no patience for binary thinking. Grace lives in the spectrum and invites you to live in the spectrum with grace. So in this moment, As Jesus is traveling, he encounters off in the distance, because there's this group of people and they were afflicted with this disease of the skin, whether it was actual leprosy, doesn't matter. They were pushed aside, declared unclean, unable to engage in the regular flow of society and of life. They were quite literally pushed to the margins. They were quarantined, if you will, physically and spiritually from the life of the community. Ostensibly as a protection for the community. We're going to keep these folks away. On the standpoint of common health and good, I get that. Makes a lot of sense. Thinking about the city's history itself. I mean, I don't know if you're new to Memphis, study what yellow fever did to the city of Memphis. Stunning, really. City lost its charter. It no longer was a city. That's how devastating that epidemic was to the city of Memphis. So to isolate, I get that in some way. But in this moment, as Jesus encounters these people, and they yell to him, they recognize in him that there's something about this guy that can help us out of our condition. Or it might also be that anyone who looked their way was going to get yelled at. Please help us. We are pushed to the side. Is there anything that can be done? Jesus says, go see the chief priest. Go. Now why? Because as a disease of the body and the spirit, for some reason, it was this religious person who could declare one clean, able now to reintegrate themselves into the flow of society. The problem was that of the 10, 9 fell under the rule of that priest that once declared clean, they could reintegrate into society. The other one, however, was a Samaritan. Why would he go to the Jewish chief priest? He might be declared clean, but he'll still be reminded, you're still a Samaritan. You're still worthy to be segregated. We don't deal with you. Think about that. All of the people that you know, all of the ways in which in our culture, in our world, we can reduce people to a label of where they're from, the language they speak, the color of their skin. Think about that. Who they love. We isolate people and compartmentalize people based on that. Somewhere in the movement of the command of Jesus, they were following the orders. They were doing the orthodox thing. I got to go be declared clean so that I can be a part. I'm not judging the other 9. The other 9 did exactly what they knew the rule was in order to be declared able to reintegrate into their lives. I don't judge that at all. And because they were doing the orthodox thing, there's an appropriate thing about that to hold on to. There are some segments of the church, the United Methodist Church, that thinks that a church like this doesn't appreciate orthodoxy. They couldn't be more wrong. Problem is, what they think is orthodox, absent orthopraxy, they don't understand that you got to have the right practice that matches the right belief. This Samaritan, interesting enough, Samaritans again, isn't it amazing how many times Jesus uses somebody that the religious establishment has held as being other than. He uses that person to be the hero of the story. Isn't that the story of the Good Samaritan? You have two encounters of people who come along the side of the road of one who's in great need, and because they were religious and they had religious things to do, they went by on the other side, but it was the one who just saw a need and met it, who happened to be a Samaritan. This is how Jesus operates in Gospels. He takes the person that we most think could not possibly be used by God and uses them to do the very thing that judges those of us who think that we're too big, too important, too correct in our theology to deign to bother ourselves to engage in someone else's life. And anytime I talk about Samaritans, I'm reminded of my good friend Ed Kilborn's joke. You know Ed? How many Samaritans does it take to screw in a light bulb? One if he's good. Good Samaritan. Wait for it. Yeah. That's about how it works when he tells it too. This one comes back and acknowledges the source of his healing. And Jesus offers an interesting response. He says, "Your faith has made you well." That's what it says in the New RSV. Another translation that was equally appropriate was this: "Your faith has saved you." Again, in Scripture, healing, wholeness, salvation are all tied up in the understanding of the same word. And so this Samaritan demonstrates more than thank you, more than the polite conditioned response to a good turn. It is a heartfelt, impassioned understanding of gratitude to and for the one who has shown them that they are not other than, that they are central to the life of in the kingdom of God. The word in the text about demonstrating thanks in the Greek is Eucharisto. It means giving thanks. You know it by the weekly practice of the Eucharist, bread and cup. The word means to give thanks. We practice Eucharist, giving thanks. And then we partake the Eucharist, the very essence of Christ, so that we go out into the world, we rise up and we reach out into the world to demonstrate what a life of gratitude looks like. Part of our ritual is this: it is right and a good and joyful thing, always and everywhere, to give what? Thanks to you, God Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. That line right there is akin to we who are sinful people falling before our Maker to say, "Thank you for saving me." We are not unlike that newly cleansed and saved leper who understands it is Jesus who has set us free. I think about that, in regards to some of the life that we live here. Interestingly enough, to think about Meister Eckhart, the person with whom I had the greatest discussions about the philosophy and theology of Meister Eckhart was John Kilzer. Let me tell you what, if you've ever been engaged in a deep theological discussion with him, have a dictionary ready, have a thesaurus ready, have everything ready. So deep was his appreciation for all of those things. But it is the most simple of things that he brought to us that I think speaks to this very moment. We talk a lot here about the God-sized hole in our hearts. Things that we've attempted to fill with everything but the one thing that can. The reliance upon a higher power who desires to restore us. Thanksgiving, gratitude, is like when you're working a puzzle and there's only one piece that fits the hole in the center of it. It doesn't matter how many other pieces you have that you try to put in that slot, only one thing fits. And the one thing that fits the God-sized hole in our hearts that only grace can fill is our gratitude. Our gratitude for the one who has saved us, who has set us free. So as you live in the border spaces between the extremes of your life, or the issues that you're living with, or the problems that you have, or the pains that you feel, or the worry that you have, or the anxiety that plagues, hear the message of the one who calls from the far reaches to say, go, you're okay, you're well. And let us give thanks in a life of gratitude, lived out for the one that we know we rely on. Is it possible? Is it possible that E.E. Cummings had it right all along, better than anybody else? I think so. I thank you, God, for this most amazing day. For the leaping, greenly spirit of trees and the blue, true dream of sky. And for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. I who have died am alive again today. And this is the Son's birthday. This is the birthday of life and of love and wings and of the gay, great happening, illimitly earth. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing, any lifted from the know of all nothing, human merely being, doubt unimaginable you? Now, the ears of my ears awake, and now the eyes of my eyes are opened. Thank you, God. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.